mean with substitutability. Something we've already seen, if you remember, a couple of weeks ago. It's about production techniques that can be where you can substitute one production technique with another, and I'll explain how this issue is related with sustainability. And then this raises the question, once we have established the issue of sustainability and substitutability, it raises the question whether sustainability is also something that is desirable from a social point of view. So whether government policymakers should aim for sustainability. Okay. And for this, we have to build some formal model. Okay, at least this is one way to tackle the issue. Okay, so try to do it formally. So we try to therefore build a very simple, quote unquote, it's not that simple, I have to admit, model where you can analyze what efficient use of non-renewable resources is. In particular, here I'm going to discuss the first order conditions that have to be satisfied, because in this way we'll see we're going to solve in an optimal way the intergenerational trade-offs that we face. Okay, the intergenerational trade-offs that we face. And then we're going to, so we are going to see here from the model, we're going to get some predictions about prices in particular. And I'm going to show you some data on real prices. And we will see that the model does not really fit well real observation, real data, and that's why I discuss some extensions and some that better fit the data, can explain better the data. And I'll also talk about generalization to renewable resources. And then last but not least, I'll talk about the issue of sustainability and non-renewable resources. That is, I'll discuss the conditions such that sustainability is something that is also socially optimal. So whether a government really should aim for, what are the conditions such that government should aim for sustainability? Okay, what is the necessary conditions to? Okay. Okay, this is the plan for this part. Okay, so let's see further what the contents here are. So basically what we try to do is we try to build a very simple model. A very simple model that is built around the production process. Okay, so the main here focus will be on the technology side. And we're going to consider natural resources as inputs, okay, into the production process. And therefore, what we want to do here is we want to assess, we want to find conditions such that we have an efficient and therefore socially optimal, okay, use of non-renewable resources over time. Okay, we want to find conditions such that this is true. We're going to see that these conditions are both intertemporal and intertemporal. Okay, so both of these aspects have to be taken into account. Okay, I'll discuss this great length. Okay, both from an intuitive point of view as well as from a formal point of view. And we're going to do this in a utilitarian framework. Okay, assuming that the policymaker cares about welfare using a social welfare function. And therefore, in this way, we are going to talk about a socially optimal pattern of resource use over time. Okay, production function. Okay, so let's see how. So the first part is I'm going to work on intuition. Okay, and then I try to go deeper into the model with some formalization. Okay, so first of all, intuition, and then more formal part. But just to be clear about what we are dealing here with is we are considering here an economy that produces a single good. This is not, I mean, this is not necessary. I mean, it's just that we focus on one aspect of our economy. Okay. And Q here can be either consumed or invested. Okay. This is kind of, this is kind of strange for those of you who have never seen economics, okay? Because this is a model where you, let's be clear about it, okay? So you have, so the assumption here is that you produce in the economy a unique good, and this good can be used for consumption, investment, and everything else, okay? So that is to say, you use the output also for not only for consumption but also for investment. Okay? And this is clearly kind of strange, okay? Because meaning that you use output as and transform the output into capital good, and capital good then becomes again output. It's a kind of very strange model. Okay? Because this is really, and this is for those of you who have taken economics courses, perhaps you have already heard about this. This goes back to the famous debate between Cambridge, UK, Cambridge, US, okay, where in the US they use this kind of model, okay, just saying, okay, you can use output also as an input in terms of capital goods, and while Cambridge, UK said, no, this is really, doesn't really make any sense, okay, which I think we can all agree. You should really think about capital being heterogeneous and being built up, okay, and consider heterogeneity. Also, Cambridge, UK showed that production functions, like the one I've written over here, aggregate production functions, they really do not exist from a logical point of view. Okay, they're really something that does not make sense from a logical point of view. But this is all documented in many papers, okay? But then US said just who cares? And we will have it our own way. And that's why everybody, starting with the win of US, Cambridge started using aggregate production function like this. Okay? I'm telling you this because I'm kind of a little bit ashamed of using like this because it really doesn't make any sense. Okay, from a logical point of view. Okay, there doesn't exist a production function like this here, so you can't really. Considering heterogeneity in capital, considering heterogeneous production techniques, you're not able to derive an aggregate production function like the one I'm going to use here. Okay, but wars are, there are winners and losers, and winners just go on, and that's why main theory in neoclassical, because this goes back to neoclassical economic theory, uses the aggregate production functions. Okay, very long introduction for this, but this is just to say that I'm using this here because there are also other models that treat capital in a heterogeneous way and they do the things in a more proper way, and you get very similar results. So just to say that for what we are going to do here, it's not that a big deal. Okay, so we are doing something very strange, and we can discuss, okay, this is really nonsense and whatever. But if you would take heterogeneity into account, heterogeneous capital stocks, heterogeneous technologies, aggregate everything, you would get, I mean, and then doing what we are doing here, you would get very similar results, just much more complicated. That's why the US won, okay, and said, okay, see, we are doing more or less the same you are doing, just we are doing things much more simpler. Okay. And that's why I'm doing this. Okay, is it kind of clear? Okay, just to say, this is what I'm doing here is very strange, okay, because I'm saying, okay, you have output that can be either consumed or transformed into capital good, which then leads to other output. It's kind of strange, okay? Because either you have output that is capital, or either you have or you have capital, or you have output that is consumed. Okay, but it's kind of strange, okay, deciding with the same output what to do. Okay. But as I said, okay, here it's no big deal. Okay, it's no big deal for what I'm going to tell you here. Okay, just to be clear about what's going on. Okay, therefore, here you have therefore the following assumption. See, you have output that can be either consumed or invested. Okay. If it is invested, it increases the capital stock. Okay, so I'm using here notation for those of you who have taken macro, are familiar with this. C is consumption, I is investment, K is capital. This is all at the aggregate level. Okay. I is investment, so I is investment, capital stock is K, capital level is. Okay, then capital given my production function can then be used in order to produce output. Now, if you have taken a macro course in undergraduate studies, you have already seen some of this. What is new here is that in addition to the capital stock, you would also have the labor. Okay, but labor, no big deal also. Okay, I'll talk about labor later on. Okay, you could also have labor here in addition to the capital stock, or otherwise consider everything in terms of per capita. Okay, so just normalize labor to 1, so everything is expressed in terms of labor units. That's also something that you can do, and so no big deal here. But the real difference compared with what you have probably seen is that in the production function, I have also the non-renewable resource as an input. Oops, I don't know why it's. Oh, wait. You have the resource as an input. Okay, this is the non-renewable resource as an input. Okay, and this is what we are going to. So now the following problem we are going to now discuss. Okay, that's what I'm going to tell you. What I'm going to study later on more carefully. There are going to be now trade-offs. Okay, the trade-offs are the following. So the first is quite obvious again for those of you who have seen, for example, growth theory. Okay, so that is how much should I invest and how much should I consume of the output that is produced. Okay, so I have the first choice, and this is an intertemporal trade-off. So at each given point in time, given the output, I have to decide how much to consume of my output and how much to invest. Okay, so not to consume. Okay, because this is a closed economy, as I'm going to show you later on. What is not consumed is invested, and therefore leads to new capital later on. Therefore, here I have a first trade-off: okay, how much to consume and how much to invest. And that's, you have seen growth models. That's something that's quite standard. The other thing that I have to do is I have to decide how much of my resource. Here I have a non-renewable resource. How much of my non-renewable resource to use in the production process? That is, how much of the resource to extract. Okay, if I think about oil or gas or whatever, okay, it's available in a finite amount. Okay, at least this is what is economically possible to extract. Okay, viable, and I have to decide how much to extract in each point in time. Okay, this is another choice I have to make. And given that if I extract resources, clearly I might have extraction costs on the one side, but clearly on the other side I have benefits. Okay. I have benefits in terms of more production. So these are going to be, therefore, intertemporal trade-offs. So each point, given each point, I have to decide how much to consume and therefore how much to invest, and how much to extract the resource, knowing that there are extraction costs, but there are also benefits. Okay? To benefits, because if I extract more, I produce more. Okay, these are intertemporal trade-offs. Just and then I have what is called, so in addition to these intertemporal trade-offs, I have intertemporal trade-offs. Okay? So, and clearly they are all in yeah, it's just another kind of noise. Okay, but perhaps more. Well, let's see. Okay, if we're going to close a window or not. We have intertemporal trade-off. And what is the intertemporal trade-off? So what you do today not only affects what happens today, but it also affects what happens tomorrow. Okay. So here, for instance, if the more I consume, the more I consume today, the less will be invested, and therefore the lower the amount of output that is produced tomorrow, and the less I can consume tomorrow. Okay, let me read. What happens today affects not only what you do today, not only affects what happens today, but also affects what happens tomorrow. So, for instance, if you consume more today, you're going to invest less today, meaning that you're building up a lower amount of capital, and therefore your production possibilities and therefore consumption possibilities tomorrow will be lower. Okay? So if you consume more today, you're going to invest less today, so lower amount of capital is built up, and therefore you have fewer consumption and production possibilities tomorrow. No, simply because what you consume, if today you have output. Of output, you have to decide how much to consume and how much to invest. The more you consume, the less you invest. If you invest a lower amount, you are building up a lower amount of capital tomorrow. Since capital enters in the production function, the lower the amount of capital, the lower output will be. It's not necessarily due to the decreasing returns to scale. You have decreasing return, but it's not the point here. Simply, if you have lower capital tomorrow, you have lower output. Okay? So this is one intertemporal trade-off, but this is something you have to solve optimally. Okay? So therefore, how much should I consume today, knowing that this is going to affect what I am able to produce tomorrow, and therefore consume tomorrow. Okay, we're going to see this then formally. Okay, this is just to give you an idea, and this is quite classic. This is a standard problem in growth theory. Okay, because in growth theory you have to optimally choose, therefore, the consumption, because what you consume, what you consume, the more you consume today, the less you're going to invest, and therefore this affects your saving rate and your growth rate. Okay, so this is quite standard in growth theory. What is new here compared with the classical growth theory is the other trade-off I'm going to talk about now. If you have a non-renewable resource, that is, non-renewable resource means that it is available only in a finite amount, and it's not going to renew, okay, given the time horizon I'm considering. Okay. Therefore, the more I extract today, the less is available tomorrow. Okay, so the resources I'm using today are no longer available tomorrow. Okay? And you see, since my resource enters my production function, okay, so the more I extract today, the less is available tomorrow, and therefore lower production and therefore consumption possibilities tomorrow. Okay, and therefore this is another intertemporal trade-off I have to solve. Okay, so the more I extract today, the less is available tomorrow, and this affects my production and consumption possibilities tomorrow. And therefore, I have these inter and intra-temporal trade-offs I have to solve optimally, and that's why I'm going to build a very simple model later on that solves optimally these trade-offs. Okay, and I will have we get some results, some testable results from what we're going to see. Okay. But for the moment being, let's keep things intuitive. Okay, and here the focus for the moment being will be on most on R. Okay, my non-renewable resource, because you see here, you can imagine what the problem is. If I have a finite resource, and I'm going to use the resource over time, the problem is that there won't be, or there will be lower and lower amount in the future, okay? And there also might be a point in time where there is none available anymore, okay? Now, what happens to my production possibilities? Okay, so therefore the issue is, can I do without the resource, the non-renewable resource, or what are the consequences of this? Or therefore, what is the implication? So how should I therefore use this non-renewable resource, okay, in order to avoid future problems? And therefore, the issue of sustainability. Okay, so here you see, I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, more detailed, but the first discussion about sustainability was really about intergenerational justice. Okay, so the first discussion about sustainability was about intergenerational justice. What we mean that we should leave the future generations some resources. Okay, and therefore we should not consume everything today. We should also think about future generations. Okay, and therefore you see here the problem. If we consume all the resources today, none is left tomorrow, and therefore there will be lower production and consumption possibilities tomorrow. Okay, so therefore the first definitions of sustainable development were focused on the intergenerational justice. Okay, so trying to take this intertemporal trade-off serious, okay, from a social point of view. Okay, see how, but then the issue is how do we value future consumption, future production, okay, compared to present consumption and present production. Okay, so here you see the issue of intergenerational justice. Okay. Okay, so here, so let's be a little bit more precise about the discussion. Okay, so in order to be a little bit more precise, okay, we can introduce here the term essentialness. Okay, so essentialness of the resource in our context means whether we can do without the resource or not. Okay. So here, an input is essential if the input is zero. The input is zero. Oops, sorry. If the input is zero, also output is zero. Okay, then we call the input essential. Okay, so that is to say, output is zero if input is zero. Okay, for any The price of the resource increases, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce its demand, if possible, because I'm going to substitute the resource with other resources. And this here is how you have a substitution effect. Okay, so since the resource gets scarcer and scarcer, its price increases, and this should trigger, at least to some extent, a substitution effect, because now other inputs are relatively cheaper. Okay? And therefore you should switch to other inputs, therefore changing production technique. That is to say, other resources or new resources become profitable. Okay? New resources become profitable and thus exploitable. Okay? Energy source. Think about energy source. Okay, so the high price of oil or gas, for instance, we're experiencing right nowadays. Okay, should clearly make profitable investments in other energy sources. Okay, and therefore lead exploiting therefore other energy sources, and therefore lead to a substitution effect. Okay, and change in production techniques. Okay, this is something that does not happen instantaneously, but it takes time. Okay, so nowadays we are really short on gas. Okay, also on oil. Okay, but clearly the change in production technique, the development of other energy sources is not something that can be done instantaneously. It takes time. Okay? But this is something that is triggered by, also in the long run, by exploiting existing gas and oil resources. Okay? Okay, here is what the figure we have already seen a couple of weeks ago. So how does the substitution here happen? What triggers the substitution, and what is the extent of this substitution? Okay. Then, given the analysis here, I'm able to give you some results. Okay, final. Okay, here you see. Let me just review this, but this is something, if you remember, we have seen a couple of weeks ago. So what is my blue line is my isoquant, okay? And these straight lines, these two straight lines I've drawn here are two production techniques. Okay, so here I'm using K and R, but this could also in principle be, R could be a non-renewable energy source and K could be a renewable energy source. Okay, so you could think here about different scenarios. So not just capital and R, but you could have, I mean, depending on the problem we're studying, other inputs over there, and therefore consider substitutability, degree of substitutability between a non-renewable resource and a renewable resource or other inputs. Okay? But here, what matters is what is the degree of substitutability between R and other inputs, okay, rather than specific cases. Okay, but because then these depend on situations we are trying to study here. So what is the point here? You see, what is the matter here with Q? My isopront here, I have these two production techniques. So Q1 and Q0, they produce the same output Q, but employ very different production techniques. Okay, so one here is much more capital intensive than the other. Okay, so 0 is more capital intensive, while 1 is more resource intensive. Okay, now this, as I said before, the shape, you're going to see the shape of isopont is an engineering problem. Okay, it's the engineer who tells me that how, because yeah, we've already seen this, but the shape really depends on the degree of substitutability, okay, between input, and it's the engineer who tells me, okay, what given an output, what kind of inputs do you need in order to produce this output? Okay, it's just an engineering problem. Okay, it's not an economic problem. Then the economic problem is what is the optimal choice of the production technique? Okay, if you remember, okay, what I said a couple of weeks ago. Now, how to solve the economic problem? I need also the ISO cost function. Okay, so this is my ISO cost function. So the ISO cost function is just the price of capital times capital plus the price of the resource times the resource. This has to be equal to my cost, my budget, and the slope of this ISO cost function is just, yeah, with a minus in front, PR over PK. Okay, so the relative price of the resource. And again, here I have, you see, two production techniques. This could then again be 0 and 1. Clearly the cost is the same, but you see, since they are different, different production techniques, because they employ capital and the resource in a different way. Okay, so 0 again is more capital intensive, while 1 is more resource intensive. Okay, this is something we have already seen. Here, just going back to this a moment, if you remember, I also discussed a couple of weeks ago the marginal rate of technical substitution, okay, which is the degree of substitutability in a given point in time. Is going to be marginal rate of technical substitution. Okay, this is would be formally the slope. Oops. Okay. The slope of yeah, this is a straight line, the slope of my isoquant in a given point. So this is my marginal rate of technical substitution in one. Okay, and therefore it tells you how to substitute in a given point in time R and K. A given point R and K. And you see different techniques have different marginal rates of technical substitution. Okay. Marginal rate of technical substitution 0. Okay, this is going to be important in a minute. Okay. Now you see the optimal solution as we have already seen, is where the marginal rate of technical substitution is equal to the relative price. Okay, this is microeconomics, if you remember, or if you remember what I said a couple of weeks ago. This tells you what the optimal production technique is. Okay. And therefore, it gives you the optimal capital over resource ratio. Okay, so how much of the resource should be employed for each unit of capital? Okay. Now, what about substitutability? Okay. What about substitutability? Here you see. Let's see if this picture is clear. Okay, so let's start with a price like this one. Okay, let's start with, yeah, let's follow the picture. Yeah, let's start with price 1, even though, yeah, let's start with price 1. Okay, so suppose you are in the first, so this will be time period 1. Okay, time period 1, you have that the resources still not exploited. Okay, that's why you have a relatively cheap price, the resource. Okay, and that's why what you're going to use is here, since the resources is very cheap. Okay, you're going to use a lot of it, and that's why you're going to choose a production technique that is intensive in the resource. Okay, so I mean that oil is very abundant. You're going to use production techniques that are very energy intensive. Okay, they use a lot of oil because oil is cheap. Okay, now you're going to use more and more. You're going to extract more and more oil, and oil is getting scarcer and scarcer. And that's why in the second time period you see here, because of the scarcity rent we have seen, so the resource gets scarcer and scarcer, the price of the resource increases. Now the price of the resource increases, so now you have PR2, which is larger than PR1. That's why you see now you have PR2 over PK, which is larger than PR1 over PK. Okay, so here you have a situation like 2 here. Okay, you see, this therefore leads to a new production technique. So you have now R2 that is lower than R1. And what you have done here is you have switched, the economy has switched to a less energy intensive production technique. And substituted in this case the resource with the non-renewable resource with capital or with other inputs. Okay, you're reducing the energy input and increasing other inputs, because you can. If the engineer tells you, yeah, you can do with a lower amount of the non-renewable resource, but then you have to increase these other resources. That's the engineer who tells you that this is feasible. Now this goes clearly on, because the more you extract, okay, the more you extract, the fewer is left, and therefore the price will be higher. Okay, so here you see in the third period, I have an even higher price because of the scarcity rent. Okay, because of the scarcity rent. So the resource gets scarcer and scarcer, and that's why you see here I have PR3, which is larger than PR2. Okay, so I have this here, and therefore you see, as a consequence, I am employing even an even lower amount. So you see, I'm extracting a lower amount. Okay, so you see, because of the, it should be this case here. So extracting a lower amount of the resource, and therefore using a lower amount of the non-renewable resource and a larger amount of other inputs that are reproducible or renewable, okay, that do not have this problem. Okay, okay, you see here the fact of, on the one side, the scarcity rent. Okay, so the scarcity rent, so the more you use of the resource, the scarcer the resource gets, the higher its price will be, which induces a substitution, which leads you to consume less and less. Okay. Now the issue is it clear? Now the issue here really is the extent of this substitutability. So what is the extent of this substitutability? And here I hope this picture is clear. I've drawn here two different isoponts. Okay, so the green one would be the green one is another production technique. Let's call this Q tilde. Okay. You see, I have here two different production technologies. Okay, so the Q case is, so the blue one, sorry, okay, the blue one is the one with a greater degree of substitutability. The green one is the one with a lower degree of substitutability. Okay, if you compare the two, I'm going to do this now, but if you just look at the two, the blue one is the one with a greater substitutability. The green one has a lower degree of substitutability. Now, why is this the case? Okay, just look at the blue one first of all. On the blue one, I have here depicted the three cases. The blue one here, this was two. Yeah, if I change the color, I change everything, unfortunately. Let's see. Okay, no, okay. So this is 2. Okay, this here is 2. This here was 1. And this was equilibrium 3. Okay, in the previous picture. Okay, if you just look here at this 3, okay, this is 1, 2, 3. If I bring this here down, okay, this would be the 3 cases for these 3 different prices. Okay, for these 3 different price schedules. Is it clear? Okay, I have these 3 different price schedules. So one is remember PR1, 2 is PR2, 3 is PR3. Okay, these are the 3 cases. Okay. Now in the blue case, I have this 1, 2, 3 on the 3 equilibria on the depicted on the blue line. Okay. For what happens for the green one? Okay, if I do the same, I start, in this case, I start with 2, okay, because in 2, you see that 2 are identical in the sense that I've drawn them such that they are identical in 2. So they are tangent one to the other, okay, in 2. Okay, that's why I start with 2, and I would like to know what happens if there is a price increase or a price decline, and what kind of substitution a price change induces. Okay, so let me repeat this. I start with 2. Okay, start with 2, and then I would like to see what kind of substitution a price change induces, okay, in the green case compared with the blue case. Now you see, if I switch to 1, okay, there is therefore a price decline, okay. I have a price decline here, okay, you see. And you see I have an increase. This would be my R2. Let's use the green one. Okay, so okay, wait a second, sorry. Oh, sorry. The green one, okay, so that you have different colors. Sorry for the mess. Okay, here we are. So this is R2, okay. Now in the green case, this is my R1. Okay, you see if I have a price decline compared with the blue one, which is R1 here. Okay, you see here. That's why I said before, the degree of substitutability in the blue case is much larger than in the green case. You see, because you see the same price change in the blue case triggers a much larger change in production technique. Okay, the same price change in the blue case triggers a much larger change in production technique. And the same also clearly for, you see, for a price increase. If there is a price increase, you see the same price increase leads to a much larger change in production technique in the blue case compared with the green case. That's why the degree of substitutability is much larger in the blue case than in the green case. Okay. Now, why does this matter? Is it clear? And I'm going to stop perhaps for a break. Is it clear? So I'm going to now be a little bit more formal about what we are talking about, because this is known as the elasticity of substitution. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples. Okay, but here this is what I'm talking here about is the elasticity of substitution can be measured. Okay, but what's the point here? You see, this is just another picture. Yeah, this is another picture. Let me perhaps. Yeah, let's go over this picture and then take a break, and then I'm going to wrap up things after the break. Here I've drawn another picture where instead of having a green one that has a lower elasticity, here I have a larger elasticity of substitution. Okay, so here the green one, you see what's key, and you can already imagine what's happened. Perhaps you're already familiar with this, okay, but some of you might not be. So what's the difference between this green here and this green here? Okay, I hope you can see. So you see this green here is much more, it's closer to an L-shaped isopond. Okay, while this here, the green here, is much closer to a linear isopond. Okay, and what's the economic intuition? Okay, so here the L-shaped isopond is a production function that has inputs that are perfect complements. So if inputs are perfect complements, then there is no possibility of substitution. Okay, if they are perfect complements, then there is no possibility of substitution because they are perfect complements. And this, you see, the green isopond depicted here is closer to this. It's much closer to this L shape. Okay, you see, it's quite close to this L shape. While this green here is closer to the linear, the straight line. And the straight line is the case of inputs being perfect substitutes. Okay? And therefore, you see here the same price change. I could do here the same as before. Okay, so here, this is my R3, this is my R2, this is my oops, sorry, not this here. This one here is my R1, and you see here the same price. Okay. Yeah, I have to this. Okay, here you see this is my R1 and this is my R3. The R2 being again the same. Okay, you see the green here is closer to a straight line compared with the blue one, and that's why the same price change now triggers a much stronger response. Okay, the same price change now triggers a much stronger response. And now let's, if this is understood, let's wrap things up. Okay, why is this important? Okay, because remember what we said. Okay, here. What's important is the issue of what we are concerned here is about sustainability. Okay, whether sustainability first of all is feasible, and then I'll talk also about sustainability being desirable. Okay, but first of all, sustainability being feasible. Okay, so remember here what the problem is. I have over time the resource has to be extracted in a decreasing way. This leads to an increase in the price because of the scarcity rent effect. Okay. Now, this leads to a substitution. Okay, so R going down and K or other inputs going up. Because I would like to keep production constant. Now the issue is the following. So how strong has the price increased to be in order to induce the necessary substitution to keep output constant? Okay, so how strongly do we have this price to increase? Okay, this is going to be key. Because you see, the issue is if what I'm going to now define after the break, if the elasticity of substitution is very low, so we are here more like in this case here, then the price increase has to be very large. Because large price increases are necessary to induce a substitution between K and L. While if elasticity of substitution is large, then only a small price increase is necessary to induce substitution. Okay? Therefore, you see here, what's going to be key is the degree of substitutability between inputs. Okay? I mean, just imagine, okay, imagine in order to understand this, okay, just imagine the two extreme cases, perfect complements and perfect substitutes. If you have perfect complements, then there will be no price increase, okay, that is able to induce a substitution. Okay, because perfect complement means you can't do without the resource. Okay. Now, if you are very close to perfect complement, it means that you need a very, very large price increase. That is to say, substitution is very difficult to obtain. And you can imagine, therefore, that in the case of production functions close to perfect complements, substitution is very difficult, and therefore sustainability is something that's very difficult to achieve. Okay? Sustainability is something that's very difficult to achieve. In the case, but if you are very close to perfect substitutes, okay, then substitution is very simple. Okay? Substitution is very simple, and therefore only small price increases are necessary to induce strong substitution, and therefore sustainability is something that's very easy to achieve. Okay? That's why technology matters so much. Okay, so for sustainability. Okay, so how can we substitute energy sources, one energy sources with another? Okay, that's what I said before. Okay, there are still some production processes where we can't do without fossil fuel energy. Okay, so traditional source of energy, simply because of technological problems. Okay, so heat. Okay, so you need such high temperatures that which are not available, which are not feasible yet from a technology point of view. Okay, we're still not there. Okay, and therefore you need still traditional energy sources. Okay, there are still some of these production processes where you can't do it. And for many others, okay, there might be other technological problems. Okay, where substitution is still very difficult. There's big debate also about, and there are many of these issues. I'm not going to stop. Okay, about also about transport. Okay, we know that for transport. Okay, so we now see many electric cars and so on and so forth. But the issue is, will we ever see some solar powered camions, so trucks? Okay. Driving around, because this is another big issue. Okay, so there might be trucks, solar-powered trucks driving around cities, but still there's a big issue whether this is feasible for longer transports. Okay, so it's still not from a technological point of view, we're still not there. Okay, with solar-powered vehicles. Okay, so for trucks, for instance. Okay, or the same issue also for airplanes, because there are still some technological bottlenecks. Okay, so we're still not there with the technology, and therefore the degree of substitutability is very low. Okay, but this is a technological problem. Okay, not we're very competent. Okay, about these issues. But this is then what we are here interested in is the consequences for sustainability, because that matters. Okay. So how we choose production techniques and the implication for long-run growth and long-run performance of our economic system. And we are interested in solving also in an optimal way intertemporal trade-offs. Okay, so if we are worried about intergenerational justice, okay, so we are worried about the welfare of our offsprings. Okay. Okay, so let me stop. I'm going to run late. Sorry for this. So I'd like to stop here for lunch. And then after lunch, I wrap things up, give you some results. Okay, so be a little bit more precise about what I've said. Give you some results, and then I'm going to build models that formalize what I said. Okay, here. Okay, and discuss everything from a formal point of view, and give you therefore stricter results, because here everything was kind of intuitive, but then we get some formal results, and that can also be brought to data and tested. Okay. Okay, thanks. Sorry for running late, and talk to you if you want later after the break, the lunch break. Bye-bye. Okay. So let's start. So what I would like to do now is give you give you some results. Okay, give you some. Let me see this. What I'm going to cover. Okay, so I would like to give you some formal results. Okay, some formal results. Okay, so these are some functions that are used in theoretical as well as in empirical studies, and that are here useful in order to clarify some results and discuss some of these. Okay, so the most famous one for sure is the so-called Cobb-Douglas production function. So the Cobb-Douglas production function is a function like this here. So you have Q. Okay, sorry, let me. So it is Q, that is a function of k to the power of alpha times r to the power of beta. And what you would like here to have is that alpha plus beta equal, change color, alpha plus beta equals 1. Okay, so in this way you have constant returns to scale. Okay, even though you have diminishing returns for the single factor of production, you have constant returns to scale. In this case, you have that inputs are essential. Okay, so if, for instance, R equals 0, then Q equals 0. So therefore, you have that both inputs are essential. Now, this is, as we're going to see in a minute, the Cobb-Douglas production function is a quite specific one. Okay? A more general one is the so-called constant elasticity of substitution production function. The constant elasticity of substitution production function is like this one here displayed. So it would be A, which is just a productivity parameter, and then it's time alpha k to the power of minus theta plus beta times r to the power of minus theta, and everything to the power of epsilon over theta. Okay, seems to be quite complicated, but it is, yeah, it is and it's not. Okay, so some things are simple, some things are much more complicated. Now, the nice thing, this is a much more flexible production function, and I'm going to discuss this production function in a minute. Okay, give you more insight, because in many now theoretical as well as empirical studies, this production function is used, okay, because it's much more flexible. Okay, so Cobb-Douglas is simpler, but this is much more general. Okay. Now let me explain what the meaning here is. So first of all, usually you assume that alpha plus beta equals 1, and then what you do usually is you have that theta has to be larger than -1. And epsilon is positive. Okay. Now let's see now the meaning of these parameters. Okay, so that's in particular here the importance of theta. Okay, so if theta is between 0 and -1, then inputs are not essential. Okay, so no input is essential, while if theta is larger than 0, then all inputs are essential. Okay. Let's see how this works. Okay, let me see how to. Okay, so suppose here So the simplest thing is considering, for instance, let me see. Consider, for instance, well, the simplest thing is consider theta -1. Okay, so if you're close to -1, if you're close to -1, then you see what you have is just a linear production function. Okay, and therefore, if r equals 0, then production is still positive. Okay, so meaning that the input is not essential. This is true clearly for all values of theta between -1 and 0. Okay, because you see what happens in this case. Here you have minus times minus becomes plus, and so the exponent here is just positive, and here you have just linear, a sum of two values. If one is 0, still production is positive. Okay, is it clear? Do you see this? And if theta is negative, okay, you see the exponent is always positive. So if one is, if you have just if you set 1 to 0, you get still a positive value. Okay, that's why it's non-essential. Is it clear? Do you see this? Okay. This is not true if theta is larger than 0. Okay? If theta is larger than 0, you see then here you have 1 over r times a positive to the power of a positive exponent. Okay, and therefore, if theta goes, sorry, if r goes to 0, you would have infinity. But this exponent here is negative, and so you would have 1 over infinity, which goes to 0. Okay, and that's why it is all inputs are essential. Okay, do you see this? Okay, it's quite trivial, but if something's not clear, just let me know. Okay, so therefore, if theta is positive, then you have that all inputs are essential. Otherwise, no one is essential. Okay, and as you can imagine, theta plays a crucial role in defining the elasticity of substitution. Okay, and therefore it's important for sustainability. Okay, as I'm going to show you in a minute. Now, first of all, I need to define what elasticity of substitution is. So what is elasticity of substitution? The elasticity of substitution here is an intuitive definition. So that is how the relative intensity of factors of production change as the relative price changes. Okay, so that is to say, if you have a change in relative prices, how strongly does the technique change as a response? Okay, and this is something we have already, that's what I've tried to do before the break, okay, by depicting these two figures. Okay, so you see the response is very different if you have an isoquant that is close to an L or an isoquant that is close to a linear function. Okay, because here you see you have a much stronger, in this case where you have an isoquant that is close to a linear function or a straight line, then you have a much stronger reaction. That's why you have a higher elasticity. While in this case, you have a shape that is closer to an L function. That's why you have a lower elasticity. Okay, and this goes back to this definition of elasticity of substitution. So this, in particular, the first one. The other one are more complicated to interpret. So if you have a change in the relative price, okay, always a percentage rate. Okay, so remember what elasticity is. And elasticity is always a percentage change if there is a percentage change in price. Okay, so how the technique changes in terms of percentages. Okay, if there is a 1% relative price change. Okay. So therefore, here this is the 1% relative price change, and this is the relative change in the technique. Okay, and therefore this definition here captures exactly what I tried to depict here. Okay, so how strongly the technique changes if there is a change in relative prices. Okay, and the others are equivalent. Okay, so you can show that they are equivalent, but they are a little bit more complicated to interpret, but they are kind of equivalent. But the definition I'm going to use, I'm going to show you now, I'm going to calculate this, okay, give you some examples. The definition I'm going to use here is this definition here, because this is the simplest to calculate. Okay, so the first is the simplest to interpret, and this is the simplest to calculate, at least in the examples I'm going to show you, because you can do it explicitly. So that would be the derivative of the log of the technique with respect to the log of the margin rate of technical substitution. Okay. This is now it's quite intuitive. Okay, these two are, if you remember, okay, these two are strictly, the first two are, the first and the last, they're strictly related. Okay, because remember, the margin rate of technical substitution, just to give you, because they might seem very different, okay, but just to give you an idea that they are not, okay. The margin rate of technical substitution at equilibrium has to be equal to the relative price, okay. So therefore, if you substitute this into my denominator here and you take the derivatives, okay, you get exactly this expression here. Okay? Because remember, the derivative of the log is 1 over the argument times the derivative of the argument. Okay, so the derivative of the derivative of log x, this is with respect to x. Clearly, this is, remember, 1 over x. Okay, and that's why if you solve these derivatives and you take into account that the margin rate of technical substitution is equal to the relative price, then you get straightforwardly this expression here. Okay, that's how you. But clearly, this is much simpler to interpret. Okay, so because this is just by looking at the picture we've seen above. Okay, so a change in relative price induces a technique. How strongly the technique changes given a change in the relative price tells you what the elasticity is. Okay, so you can have a more or less elastic reduction function. Now here there are extreme cases. Okay, sigma is what I call here the elasticity. Okay, therefore sigma goes from 0 is between 0 and infinity. Okay, 0 and infinity. And you have here the zero elasticity case is the perfect, is the case where inputs are perfect complements. These are the case where perfect inputs are perfect complements. Elasticity is equal to infinity in the case of perfect substitutes. Okay. And in between, you have in between values of the elasticity. Okay, that's now here. What does it mean? So this is just again to clarify this point. What does it mean? Zero elasticity of substitution means that inputs must be combined in fixed proportions, and therefore isopons are L-shaped. And this is the case of Leontief production function. Okay, so where you have to use both inputs in proportional way. So a certain number of units of K and a certain number of units of R. Okay, and there is no substitution between the two. In this case, you get L-shaped isopons. Okay. It would be usually the case of the production function is written like this. Okay, so you have Q. Okay, Q equals the mean of AK, let's say, and BR. Okay, this is a Leontief production function. Okay, so and this gives rise to L-shaped isopods. Okay, and therefore you have to use inputs in a proportional way. Certain combination of L and K. Now the other extreme is perfect substitutes. In this case, you have sigma equals infinity, and that would be the case of isopod straight lines. In this case, you have a production function that is just linear, AK plus BTR. Okay, this is a production function with where inputs are perfect substitutes. Okay, and isopods are just straight lines. You can calculate them. Just linear, okay, you see. An isopod here would be K equals 1 over A Q minus A over B over A R. Okay, this is the isopod. Okay, you can calculate a straight line, you see. And clearly in between you have a degree of substitutability that is between 0 and infinity, depending on its elasticity, and therefore, loosely speaking, the degree of curvature of the convex isopod tells you the elasticity of substitution. So the greater the curvature is, the greater the elasticity is. So the greater the curvature, the greater the elasticity. Here, this is another picture which I have just in order to show you the difference. Okay, again, but I think the other two pictures I've discussed before the break, that they were clear enough. Okay, here you see what happens if there is a price. So starting with initial prices. Oops, sorry. PR R over PK. Okay. Now, what happens if there is an increase in the price? Okay, you see you have a substitution. Starting with A, you go either to B prime or B, depending on the curvature. Okay, and you have a strong reaction if you have a higher degree of elasticity. But here you have elasticity sigma, and here you have let's call this sigma prime. Here you have sigma, and you have that sigma prime is lower than sigma. Okay, here you have a lower, yes, you have a lower elasticity. Okay, is it clear? Everything clear? Okay, I would like to give you an example. Okay, so this might be useful for further cases we're going to see. Okay, so what happens in the, it's quite simple to do this, so you have the calculus at least once. You see how this is done. Start with the simple case of Cobb-Douglas. Okay, so suppose you have a Cobb-Douglas production function, and therefore Q is K to the power of alpha, R to the power of beta, alpha plus beta equals 1. So what is so first of all, what is the marginal rate of technical substitution? Okay, so how to calculate this? Let me perhaps do this. Let me show you once and for how this is done. Okay, suppose here I have, so suppose I have my production function is Cobb-Douglas, alpha R beta. Okay. Then what you want to do is you take the total differential here. And this is going to be the marginal product of capital 1 dkr beta plus the marginal product of resources alpha, k to the power of alpha beta r beta minus 1 dr. And since you wanna you do this on the isopod, so you want the output not to change. Okay, So in this way, if you rearrange things, okay, so this is the marginal product of, capital times K. This is the marginal product of resource times VR. And therefore, therefore another way to write this is that the marginal product of capital K plus the marginal product of resource VR. And you want this to be equal to 0. So in this way, you get the marginal rate of technical substitution. Okay? So the marginal rate of technical substitution, this is done here in K over R. So this K over R. Okay, this is my marginal rate of technical substitution. And in this case, this is therefore the marginal, so minus the marginal product of resource over the marginal product of the capital. And if I use my expressions here, I have calculated here above, I get beta K to the power of alpha R to the power of beta minus 1. And here I have alpha K alpha minus 1 R to the power of beta. Okay, now if I simplify, okay, I get this is beta minus, oh yes, it's got the minus beta over R over alpha. And here I have what is left. Here I have R over K. It is my marginal rate of technical substitution. Now, remember, now I would like to use the definition of sigma. Okay, here. So what is my elasticity of substitution? Elasticity of substitution is the derivative of the log of K over R with respect to the derivative, with respect to the log of the marginal rate of technical substitution. Okay. Now here, how can I use this? Okay, here you see, I have that the log of the marginal rate of technical substitution. I take clearly the absolute value because otherwise it's negative. That makes sense for taking logs. I have here as a consequence, this is just the log C of beta over alpha. And then I have plus the log K over R. Okay. And therefore, if I take now this derivative, okay, the derivative of this with respect to this, you see that the derivative is just 1. Okay, is it clear? Because I take the derivative of this with respect to this, that's just 1. Okay, quite simple in this case. Okay, any questions? Is it clear? Now, let me very briefly I would like to show you why the constant elasticity of substitution function is so important and why it is called constant elasticity of substitution in the first place. It's a very important function. Okay? So what happens with the constant elasticity of substitution production function? So in this case, I have, this by the way is the function that's most used in the empirical literature. So if you write models and you want to estimate models, in order to calculate counterfactors, do your estimates, what you do is you use normally the constant elasticity of substitution, constant elasticity of substitution production function because it's very flexible. Okay? And as I'm going to show you now. Okay, so here this is, as I've said, A times alpha k to the power of minus theta plus beta r to the power of minus theta minus epsilon over theta. Okay, now why is this important? Okay, so again, here you would have to calculate the marginal rate of technical substitution, doing what I've done before. Okay, so taking, so remember, this is the dk over d. Okay, so therefore, this is minus the marginal product of the resource over the marginal product of capital. Okay, so what I have to do is I have to calculate the marginal product of capital and the marginal product of the resource, and calculate the ratio between the first and the second. Let's do this. Okay, so you have done this once. Okay, it's very simple. Okay, but okay, it's worth because the result is very important. Okay, so here what you have, let's start with the marginal product of the resource. Okay, in this case you have A minus epsilon theta. Okay, this is yeah, okay. And then I have this bracket here. I'm not writing, just to save space. And then I have what the derivative of the internal part, so that would be beta times minus theta r minus theta minus 1. Okay. The other is very similar. Okay, so the marginal product of capital is very similar. Okay, so it's A, it's just exactly epsilon over theta internal minus epsilon theta minus 1, and then I have, in this case, alpha, and then I have minus theta, and then I have k to the power of minus theta minus 1. Okay, so you see, if I divide the first by the second, because this is what I have to do, if I divide the first by the second, okay, you see this all simplifies. It's very simple. Okay, so it's just looks complicated, but it's very simple. Okay, that's why. So if you do the math, okay, so what you're left with is just beta over alpha, and then here you have r over k, and then you have here to the power of minus theta minus 1, okay, which is exactly what I had here. Okay. Now, why is this useful? Because now remember, this again is my marginal rate of technical substitution. Technical substitution. Yeah, by the way, this I can clearly write this k over r theta plus 1. And now I can take logs as before. Okay, so taking logs, marginal rate of technical substitution, again, an absolute value equals the log of beta over alpha plus, here I have theta plus 1 of the log of k over r. Okay. And therefore I can take the derivative. We see here, it's very simple. I can write this as log of k over r. This is just 1 over theta plus 1 of the log of the marginal rate of technical substitution minus 1 over 1 plus theta, yes. The log beta over alpha. I'm done. Okay, here you see, if I take the derivative now of the log of K over R with respect to the log of the marginal rate of technical substitution, I get 1 over 1 plus theta. Okay, this is the result. Okay, this is my elasticity of substitution. That's why this production function here is called constant elasticity of substitution production function, because the elasticity is constant. Okay. The elasticity is constant, and as I said before the break, it depends on theta. Okay. The elasticity is constant, and it depends on theta. This theta here, this parameter here, tells you the shape of the isoquant and therefore the degree of substitutability. Okay. That it plays a crucial role in the results I'm going to tell you now. Okay. And in particular, you see, if theta equals 0, okay, just to give you an example, if theta equals 0, then I have sigma equals 1. So that is to say, for theta equals 0, I am back to the Cobb-Douglas production case. Okay, so for theta equals 0, I'm back to the Cobb-Douglas production case. Okay, so the two are identical. If theta goes to minus 1, you see, if theta goes to -1, then here I have 1 over 0, which goes to infinity. And therefore, I have sigma that goes to infinity. This would be the case of perfect substitutes. This is also what I tried to explain intuitively when I illustrated the constant elasticity of substitution production function. Okay, so here you see I have the linear production function. And if I have theta that goes to infinity, then I have the elasticity of substitution that becomes 0. So, and this is therefore the case of Leontief production, so perfect complement. So you see here, that's why the constant elasticity of substitution production function is that important, because in particular for the issue of non-renewable resource, the efficient and optimal use of non-renewable resources, in particular if you're concerned about the sustainability, because we can simply change one parameter and get all possible cases. Okay, because you see here, from stretching theta from -1 to infinity, I get all possible cases. So from perfect substitutes to perfect complements. Okay, so that's why the production function is that flexible and that important, because it covers all possible cases. Okay, covers all possible cases. Now let's, as a last result, let's see. Yeah, I'm just going to give you the result, and then I'm going to stop, and then next week we're going to see the formal part. Okay, so we're apart from this formal part, so what we have seen before the break, what I told you intuitively, next week we're going to see how to formalize this and get some additional results that can be brought to data. And that we are going to do is looking at data given the model. Okay, so here, what are the results? Okay, so first things first, so let's see what the results are given what I mentioned till now. Okay, this is what we have seen. Okay, so let me summarize. Okay, what we have seen and then the results. Okay, so what we've seen today is the following. Okay, so as production continues through time, stocks of non-renewable resources must decline. Okay, stocks of non-renewable resources must decline. And this, because of scarcity, leads the price of these non-renewable resources to increase. Okay, this is the scarcity ramp. Okay. This leads to a substitution effect. Now, therefore, the ratio resource to capital will fall because of substitution. Okay, I'm going to substitute the resource with capital. Rising in this way, marginal product of the resource, because the resource will get scarcer, less is employed, and this rises the marginal product of the resource and reducing the marginal productive capital. This is also important for we're going to see later on. So now the extent, the magnitude of this substitution effect depends on the size of the elasticity, okay, what I've just discussed. So the size of the substitution of the elasticity is crucial here, because if elasticity of substitution is high, this is something I discussed already before the break, then only small changes in the relative price of input is necessary to induce a large change in quantities of input used. Okay, only if elasticity is high, only a small price change is necessary to induce a large change in production technique. And therefore, in this case, resource scarcity is of little importance, okay? Resource scarcity is of little importance, okay? Because it is very easy to substitute, okay, the resource. It's very easy to substitute the resource. And that's why, in this case, resource scarcity is not that important. But if there are low substitution possibilities, so that is to say, elasticity is low, that in this case, the resource depletion leads to a rise in the price of the resource, leads only to a small substitution, so a small change in production technique. Okay. And in this case, resource scarcity has a serious and severe negative effect. Because substitution possibility is limited. In particular, the extreme case is quite clear. Okay, in this case, you have zero substitution possibility. So no scope exists for replacement. Okay, let's. Okay, perhaps the best thing is stop here, because then next week I'm going to first of all, give you the results. Okay, give you the results intuitively by defining better the framework. Okay, and then I'll give you the formal model. Okay, so otherwise I would have now to rush. Okay, and would not make much sense. Okay, so that's why let's stop here. And so next week I'll start addressing the issue of whether sustainable development is actually possible and what is necessary to have sustainable development. Okay, next week I'll answer this question. Yeah, with more time available, because otherwise you would have now to rush over things, and that's something I would like to do. Okay, so that's why I would like to stop here if there are no questions. Okay, none. Okay, so thanks again, and talk to you now next week if you want. Okay, so okay, thanks. Bye. You're very welcome.